Welcome to the Psychedelic Passage podcast. My name is Jimmy Nguyen, and this is my fellow co-founder and co-host, Nicholas Levich. Thanks for joining us. This week, we're very excited to have our first guest on the Psychedelic Passage podcast. We have Joël Brierre of Kaivalya Kollectiv, and we will be talking about a lot of different topics, but primarily we'll be chatting about 5-MeO DMT, Bufo, alvarius, and also the different ways, tips, tricks, actionable information for folks who are interested in journeying with this specific, medicine, and how to go about doing so not only safely, but in a ethical and effective way that makes sense for their own healing journey. So a little bit about Joël. Joël is the founder of Kaivalya Kollectiv. Within that collective is Tandava Retreats with their flagship retreat center in Mexico. In addition to that, Kaivalya Kollectiv holds 5-meo.education, which is an educational platform discussing all of the benefits, risks, scientific research, actionable practices, tips, anything that you can gain from learning about 5-MeO DMT and how to engage properly. Formerly, I believe you grew up in Washington, D.C., spent a little bit of time in Los Angeles, and then also traveled the world as well, living in ashrams in India, gathering and gaining your yogic practice, also apprenticing under curanderos in Peru. So we definitely have a very worldly guest for our first guest here on the Psychedelic Passage podcast. So Joël, welcome. Really great to have you here with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I know that a lot of your focus lately has been with 5-MeO DMT and Bufo, alvarius, just to get to learn a little bit more about you before we dive into, actionable items for our listeners. How did you progress from your, relationship with plant medicines into 5-MeO DMT, and why does that become the medicine of choice for you in your work with your clients?
Thank you. So, I was a huge psychonaut back in the 90s and very, very fond of all psychedelics. However, in the 90s, I was also into all other substances as well. So I went through my fair bit of knuckleheadedry trauma back then, and I found my healing in the early 2000s via yoga and meditation. And during, right before that, I'd kind of gotten clean off of all substances, including psychedelics. But then I reapproached plant medicines in around 2007. But this time they were reintroduced to me by my two teachers. And this time kind of re-entering that space, but having some sort of system or geography of self-inquiry, such as yoga and yogic philosophy. It was a completely different understanding and a completely different experience. And so from there, I got to study under a lot of amazing people around the world. And got to have a lot of different growth experiences. I found myself leading retreats around 12 years ago, and then incorporating medicines into them probably around 7 years ago. I was reinitiated into 5-MeO DMT around that time, and I tried it for the first time back in '99, but didn't even really remember my experience. There was no container, there was no effort. We didn't even know the difference between 5-MeO DMT and NN-DMT then. And so I don't really consider it my first time. But this time, I went and I had that full, grand, mystical experience that completely captivated me. At that time, I was serving NN-DMT ceremonially, and had a very deep relationship with that medicine, but this one just rocked my world. This one completely took the cake. And, having a background in yoga, I recognized that peak experience to be what the yogis would call nirvikalpa samadhi, or what the Buddhists would call nirvana. And it was that state of consciousness that can be reached when finding absolute stillness or a complete cessation of the mind. And one of the first things I thought when I came out of that experience was, wow, if everyone in the world was able to try this medicine, there would be no war, there would be no suffering. because, we all are innately suffering as human beings from some sort of feeling of separation, some sort of feelings of unworthiness or not being truly whole. And to have a real palpable experience of our true wholeness is something that is deeply cathartic and deeply healing. And so I became fairly obsessed with 5-MeO-DMT from there and began researching the hell out of it. And a while later began to take the steps to learn how to become a carrier of this medicine. And I reached out to a few people who were soon to become mentors of mine. And they kind of showed me the ropes in switching over my DMT practice to a 5-MeO practice. And, around that time, especially because retreats were already, my niche, I would say, it was very obvious to me that the retreat or the multi-day container was the best fit for working with 5-MeO-DMT because it allows participants to completely step out of their, regular world. And that was what really did it for me. So that takes us here. Here we are. I am firmly of belief that 5-MeO-DMT can help us resolve the innate conflicts and suffering that we have within ourselves, so we no longer have to take our own suffering out on our neighbors and to our fellow humans.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about helps us to resolve instead of resolves for us, which I think is a really big part of any sacrament with, psychedelic medicines. And for those listeners out there, you're probably already having a few questions about the difference between Bufo, alvarius, and 5-MeO-DMT, of which Bufo, alvarius is the secretions of a specific toad, of which contains 5-MeO-DMT, but also a number of different psychedelic compounds, and I believe there's like maybe even like 12 other known, psychedelic compounds within the secretion of the toad, of which 5-MeO-DMT can also have a synthetic source as well of pure 5-MeO-DMT, which then differs from NN-DMT, NN-dimethyltryptamine, which does seem to be the more prevalent conversation here. But just to really note that though they're all related as tryptamines, they're very, very different. So I understand that within your retreat work, clearly you have to do a lot of, screening, vetting, making sure that the folks who do come to your retreat center are offered a safe container. Can you talk through a little bit of, let's say I'm a listener here on this podcast, or I'm just curious about 5-MeO-DMT. What are the things that should be on my radar as I'm trying to discern whether this particular medicine is right for me or not?
Beautiful question. Firstly, just understanding that 5-MeO-DMT is a big commitment. It's a very, very powerful experience. We can definitely say that it is the most powerful of the psychedelic compounds, experientially wise. And so, firstly, asking ourselves, what are our intentions going into working with this medicine? Are we just looking for an experience? And if so, are we prepared for the implications that come with having a full-blown experience like that? Are we looking for healing? If so, are we willing to put in the work through the preparation and integration process? So it's very important that people looking to do this medicine understand what they're getting themselves into. This can definitely be a life-shifting experience, but it can also be a life-shattering experience. So taking care to make sure that you're going into the right type of container for this medicine is really, really important. Making sure that whoever you're going to sit with has a preparation protocol, that they have a screening and intake protocol, making sure that they have an integration protocol as well. We begin our process with screening and intake, making sure that essentially we're not going to harm you in any way by serving you this compound, making sure you're not on any contraindicating medications that may interfere with the process, making sure that there are no existing mental conditions that may be aggravated by this experience, making sure that there's no heart conditions that could result in even death. So first thing is safety, setting that solid foundation down, and then getting to know you as a participant. Why are you looking to come do this medicine? How can we be of service to you? As I mentioned before, some people are looking for an experience. These are spiritual seekers or explorers of consciousness and want to have this big kind of peak mystical experience. Some people are coming who are innately suffering or deeply suffering from things like treatment-resistant depression, acute anxiety, trauma, etc. So getting to feel into what kind of attention, what kind of container you need as an individual. And then we start the preparation process. So we like to prep with you at least 2 weeks before your arrival. And we spend that time getting to understand what's alive in your process, getting to understand how we can best hold space for you, getting to understand what languages you're comfortable with. And in that sense, I mean, some people are on their spiritual journey and like kind of like those type of lenses and languages, speaking through whether yogic or hermetic or, you know, new age philosophy, kind of any of it. Some people are more appreciative of the clinical lens. So getting to understand what type of languages make you feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, this container is about you. It's not about us as a company or us about practitioners trying to bring you into a specific belief system. It's about us meeting you where you're at and being there for your process. So that whole preparation process not only gives us a chance to get to know you and get to understand how we can set up your container, but it also allows you to begin that system of self-inquiry and to dive in and see what areas of our inner world may present resistance during the experience. It gives us time to go in and start preparing our mind for this experience, because you know what separates 5-MeO DMT from all other psychedelics is that in its peak experience, it can result in a complete dissolution of the individual sense of self. So we hear this term ego death thrown around a lot, but it's usually thrown around without a real understanding of what this actually means. And for there to be an actual ego death or actual ego dissolution, physically, it's the default mode network quieting in the brain, the parts of the brain that give us the experience of being a separate, unique, individual human. Those go offline, and our sense of subject-object relationship dissipates, and we are left to experience ourselves as pure, boundless, unadulterated awareness or pure consciousness. And that's why this medicine has the nickname the God molecule. But you know, in that process, that is a death process. And so quite often, if we have not taken the time to prepare ourselves for the fact that we may feel our sense of self dissolving away quite rapidly, and that the mind might think that we're dying during this, is very important to give attention to. Very important for people to be prepared for that, because if we've got no sense of understanding that there is awareness on the other side of the mind, and that our whole sense of reality can completely shut down, and then we can return from this, you know, that's a notion that isn't in the back pocket of every single psychonaut. So some people may not realize this, and then they take a pipe, and then a few seconds in, they feel themselves completely dissolving away, and their mind thinks they're about to die. And so their mind says, oh man, if I don't hold on with everything I've got, I'm never coming back. Or if I don't hold on with everything I can, I'm going to die. And so they can end up resisting the experience so hard that they pull themselves out and actually give themselves a traumatic experience. So the preparation process is not only for us to learn how to create a container for you, but it's also for you to be able to prepare your psyche for the immense experience that is coming your way, and for you to be able to be prepared so you can not only get the most out of it, but that you can surrender easily into the experience and get to witness one of the greatest and most profound remembrances a human being can have. And a lot of that goes into sense of safety. You know, the preparation period is very important for establishing a sense of safety and a sense of trust, because the last thing a mind thinks before it goes offline is, am I in a safe place to completely relinquish control? Am I in a safe place to completely lose control? And if we haven't taken the steps to really tick all of those boxes, then there's going to be a lot more resistance than needs to be. So, you know, for us, setting the container here with the retreat is all about allowing you to feel safe and allowing you to feel held as a participant through this whole process, knowing that stepping into the unknown is some of the most confrontational work a human being can engage in. And there are a few things more that can be more fearful than stepping up to the plate to take a pipe with this. So really speaking to that and just creating a nurturing, welcoming, warm environment where participants feel held, and to where they know that they're going to be supported both before, during, and after. And yeah, I think that might have been a long-winded response to that question.
There's a lot of good nuggets of you know, truth within that, and I'm hearing that it's not only the container that is set surrounding a journeyer, but also the container that the journeyer can set for themselves, and the tools and skills and perspective to walk in knowing that, I was giggling to myself as you were saying the term ego death gets thrown around quite a bit. And I think that it kind of gets tossed around quite feverishly in our society. There's a lot of folks who are like, I want to kill the ego, I want to destroy that thing, I want to so on and so forth. And then I'm like, okay, well then how do you operate in this world when you come back,
Never gonna go to the bathroom, never gonna put pants
Exactly.
on, never gonna do anything that requires functioning.
Yeah. So I appreciate
Exactly.
I appreciate what you're saying. So it sounds like, some of the main things that you do with your screening are getting an idea of, medical health. I think you mentioned like cardiac issues, mental health, medications or medical contraindications there. I know in some of your past interviews that you've mentioned CPTSD, OCD, and you had also mentioned folks who are really attached to their belief systems or their systems of the self, which I refer to as rigidity of the mind or rigidity of the self. Is it all mental health conditions that would preclude you from exploring 5-MeO DMT, or are there certain ones that you do work with, and maybe there are certain ones that are a real no-go for folks?
Good question. Yeah, I would say a lot of it is actually a gray area and really depends case to case. As we mentioned, I've spoken a lot about how a combination of complex PTSD and OCD might not be the best candidate. That being said, we just had someone here 2 weeks ago who suffers from PTSD along with OCD, and it really depends from participant to participant. The main factor there is their willingness to allow, their willingness to surrender. Sometimes, let's say someone has some complex PTSD and they suffer from OCD as well, and let's say that they are very stuck or very firmly holding on to their idea of what their specific condition is, and very firmly holding on to their sense of needing to be in control, and are quite sure that they do need to be in control, then that may rise a little bit of complication. If they understand that they have problems releasing control, but are willing to approach a situation where they will no longer have control, that's something we can work with. But if there is already a preset resistance, it's going to bring up some complications. And there's a lot of other conditions that we might not accept here at our center, but might refer them out to another someone else who's working with this medicine in more of a clinical setting. This medicine has been very successful for combat veterans with severe PTSD. However, as we do not always have a clinical psychologist on site who is prepared to handle that type of situation, it's not something that we really take on here. But there are groups that are working with this specific conditions, and with these specific groups that we would always refer out to. The main things are medications. There's a lot of contraindicating medications with this one: SSRIs, SNRIs, CYP2D6 inhibitors, things like that can either cause serotonin toxicity or serotonin syndrome, things like that we look out for. And it's not that someone is necessarily canceled out from being able to participate with this medicine, but we would have them work with their primary care physician to first determine if it is safe for them to taper off the medicine temporarily, and if so, to do so with the help of their physician, things like that.
Yeah,
Just
it
making
has
sure
to be
that
a part of the conversation, at least.
Yeah, exactly. So certain things that we would really kind of ixnay out, I would say, borderline personality disorder can be a bit of a tricky one here. Schizophrenia, and recent psychotic break or history of psychosis. That's one that can definitely be triggered with this medicine. So that's one we generally refer out to a different medicine. There's going to be some different protocols and approaches here that will be more likely to assist them than 5-MeO DMT.
I hear you. This is the answer that many of our clients hate to hear, which is it all depends. It all depends on the individual. And there's a lot of gray area where, you know, in our society, people do view psychedelics as this, you know, potential cure-all, or this, you know, hope that they haven't seen in a very long time. And that can create a lot of pressure on whether folks
Yeah.
will qualify or not qualify for a specific medicine or a specific, you know, experience. And it's so dependent on the individual. It's certainly not a one size, you know, fits all there.
Mhm.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that, because for some folks, tapering off of medications is a possibility with advisement of your prescribing professional. For some other folks, that will cause way too much instability in your life, which actually can be
Yeah,
counterintuitive to, you know, grounding and healing, you know, with the use of
exactly.
psychedelics. And so we follow along with a lot of those same, you know, practices, as far as at least having a conversation about, you know, all of these things. And so
Joel, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
You know, you talked a lot about our relationship with control, our sense of self, our rigidity of ego structure, some of these things. And we talk about this a lot with our clients as well. But a lot of folks aren't even aware of how much they're holding on to until everything's been taken offline before. So the question that this comes up for me is like, well, do you suggest that a first time explorer of something like 5-MeO DMT, do you suggest they sit with psilocybin first so that they start to
Mm.
have experiences in altered states? They start to see themselves with some reduction of default mode network.
It's a good question. And I would say my answer has shifted over the years, where previously I would have said yes. Now, surprisingly enough, I would say at least 90% of our participants here at the center are complete versions to psychedelics and plant medicines. A lot of them have never even smoked cannabis. And what's odd about this is that amongst all of our colleagues in the 5-MeO space, I think we are pretty much the only center, or the only practitioners really taking on this type of group, where most of our colleagues who are serving five, their average participant is someone who has already experienced in other medicines, is working their way up. Whereas nowadays, as psychedelics are being framed into the mainstream as something for mental health, and then 5-MeO is getting this reputation of being this fast-acting, powerful thing, people are doing the research and seeing this and reaching out to us. And it's very interesting, where a couple of years ago, I would have a lot of apprehension about serving someone who was new to psychedelics, where now most of our participants are. And we're actually finding that it can even be an advantage, as long as there's a container with proper preparation, that it can be an advantage that they haven't already had an experience with something else that's affecting the default mode network. Because as five affects it so rapidly and so much more powerfully, it can almost, if they have no expectations or no idea what to expect, it can almost help the resistance. It can
ah
almost make it not as much of a shock, if that makes any sense.
no,
It's
it
something we're still
does.
looking at, but yeah.
Yeah, it does,
Mhm.
because we talk to our clients a lot about comparison mode, where folks are either
Yeah.
comparing against trip reports or comparing against what they hear from their friends, colleagues, whatever, who have had psilocybin
Hmm.
experiences, or just comparing to past, you know, psilocybin experiences, or this idea of like expectations. And so having a blank slate
Yeah.
actually seems to me like that can be a potential benefit for folks. But what I'm hearing in your answer is that individuals are much more educated around their approach to 5-MeO DMT, or maybe just psychedelics in general, having more research available to them, having more you know, friends and families that they're hearing stories from, just having more just access to information. And then I would imagine that your container has evolved over time to be better suited from the screening standpoint to the emphasis on prep and integration. I'm curious, do you
Hmm.
have folks who clear your screening, who, you know, get into the prep, but then at some point into prep or something, you're now identifying something new, or maybe they're disclosing something new, or based on their presentation, you then find out, okay, maybe this isn't the right, you know, approach for you. Does that happen? And then how do you navigate that?
That does very slightly occasionally happen. It's something that happens, but it's something that is very important that as practitioners we honor and listen to that voice, and not kind of shy away from it because we've already, taken a deposit and gone into the prep process. If some red flags are coming up, it always behooves us as practitioners to investigate those. And so one kind of potential action that we would take there is, we're teamed up with Hallucinogen, the biotech company out of Canada, and sometimes we use their saliva swabs. So we could have a swab sent to their house, and let's say we're having some fear about their mental stability. And let's say we're getting some warning signs of a potential break, psychotic break. We could have a swab sent to their house, and it would just come in a prepackaged envelope for them, and it wouldn't cost them a dime. They could do a little saliva swab, put it right back, and have it sent back. And we can know through those tests if they have any propensity towards serotonin syndrome, if they have a sensitivity towards serotonin agonist psychedelics, or if they have a psychotic break on the horizons beginning to cook up. So that's always useful information with us. Or just being candidly honest with them and just saying, we're feeling that, with some stuff that's coming up, we're feeling that this process might actually aggravate or exacerbate what they've got going on. And so make an appropriate referral. Referring them, so a lot of times, especially if it's trauma induced or something where we're having some fear about destabilizing a participant, referring them out to an MDMA therapist or something like that first, or referring them out to someone else who can give them the care that they need at this time before they take this big step.
So try to find a different outlet, for them, if you find that your programming and your retreat center isn't the right, fit for them. And I imagine that we can talk for many, many hours about psychedelics and, 5-MeO, DMT and Bufo and all the like, but I know that we are getting close to approaching our time. I
want to jump in with one last question for anyone that's listening here. With this particular medicine, I know in particular that I've had a couple of friends who have had spiritual emergences and things that can be, are like 1 degree off from a psychotic break. And to me, the big difference there is support. But
yes,
do you find that the same propensity for this medicine to lead to spiritual emergence is also what makes it so powerful?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is a medicine that can quite often, induce spiritual emergence / emergency. And, if we put this up against the frameworks of, yogic or Vendentic or Chinese Zen thinking, we come up with these same similarities where, these big stages of awakening feel like a psychotic break. It feels like you're going crazy. There's an entire falling away process where all of our outer world, all of our external world that may have been a reflection or an echo of our internal suffering begins to fall away because we've resolved some things in here, and it can feel like you're going crazy. One of my favorite teachers, Adyashanti, says enlightenment is a destructive process. And so arming participants with that knowledge and understanding and letting them know beforehand that, hey, even if this is the most blissful, beautiful experience of your life, there may still be some turbulence in the integration process. Here's how we're going to support you, and here's the steps you can take to kind of keep some sort of semblance of sanity through it. But yeah, that was a great question. It's definitely something we see and something that the container is aimed at assisting them with. And then each participant from our retreats gets assigned an integration specialist who works with them for 4 weeks afterwards as well, via remote Zooms. And so, all of them are specialists who would have a familiarity with spiritual emergence and emergency.
Yeah, and in the work of Stan and Christina Groff, they describe that the difference between a spiritual emergence versus a spiritual emergency is the type of support and the level of support that you get. And for folks who do experience some challenge and difficulty via a spiritual emergence, I really recommend folks to look up the work of Stan and Christina Groff. They have highlighted this quite prolifically over the past several decades. This is a process that can take days, weeks, months, years in unsupported areas. And so just understanding that this is potentially, a dynamic process. And I love that you name your retreat centers Tandava retreats, which is the dance of Shiva, which is the destruction, which makes way for the creation of the new. And so I really, really appreciate that. As we wrap up, Joel, maybe you can give our listeners the 3 most important tips if they're interested in 5-MeO DMT. I know you've talked at length about screening. We've talked about all of that. I know in some of your other, interviews and articles, you've talked about how important it is to find a well-qualified and seasoned and experienced 5-MeO DMT facilitator. So if there were 3 things, tangible things, actionable things that you can share with folks who are interested in psychedelics, but maybe more so 5-MeO DMT, what would you share with them?
I would say, firstly, doing research and making sure that this is the medicine that is calling to you, making sure that you are specifically seeking what 5-MeO DMT can allow us to experience, rather than just saying, oh, I'm into psychedelics. Oh, this is one. I want to try this one. Making sure this is the experience you're looking for, researching and understanding what the potentialities are from taking this journey are. Then researching your facilitator endlessly. Ask them lots of questions. And if you don't know what to ask them, just go to our resources page on the 5 platform. And there is what to ask your DMT, or what to ask your facilitator. And getting to first make sure that there's no malpractice allegations out around them. Making sure that they've taken the time to really work on themselves before trying to become a facilitator. We've got a lot of people these days that just want to become a teacher and want to be in charge, but don't want to take the steps to really work on themselves first. So make sure that they are holding this medicine with integrity. Make sure that they've got a plan to keep you safe through it. Make sure that there is an emergency protocol. Just make sure that they've got a container for you. And then third, prepare your integration. First, make sure that there's integration support, but also a nesting period is always advised after this medicine. If you can take at least 3 days afterwards to really allow yourself to just be before going right back into the throes of the daily life, it can do worlds of wonder. As the mind is still attempting to compartmentalize something that is completely ineffable, and it allows us just to be in that process rather than to try and apply it to real life things right away. Allow this integration to take hold within ourselves is very, very important.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you for the wisdom there, and trying to add a tangible aspect to it as well. So you can find more of Joel's work at Kaivalya Kollectiv. That's spelled Kaivalya. Collective is spelled Kollectiv. And then within that, there's Tendava retreats, and then also the educational platform that I mentioned before, which is FIVE-MEO.education. And there's FAQs and all types of great, information there. So thank you to our guest, Joel. And that concludes this episode of the Psychedelic Passage podcast. You can download episodes of our podcast. Look for all of our episodes by going to cannabisradio.com or subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and anywhere else that you get your podcasts. If you like the show, we would really, really heartfully appreciate a rate and review that allows us to do our job better, and that allows us to better engage with the community. So thank you all so much, and we will see you next week.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.